Hey, RetconRaider here. Like I said in yesterday's video about Stygian, I originally wanted to include all this information in a single video. But once I started recording, I quickly realized I was running close to half an hour long. That's way too long for a video where I basically just talk to myself, so I trimmed it into 2 videos for the sake of our collective sanity. Anyway, today, let's dive back into Stygian's fascinating character creation system. I hope you're ready, because this is going to take a while. Now, I've talked about the character creation system before, but that was based on incomplete information with a bit of speculation on my part to help fill in some of the gaps. But now Cultic Games has given us a more comprehensive look at what their final character creation process is actually going to be like, complete with a brief video showcasing how it will all work. You can check out the video over on their official YouTube channel. But if you don't mind hearing me yammer on about it, then feel free to stick around. Character creation in Stygian is a 7-step process, with the majority of the player's decisions having at least some impact on how they'll approach playing the game, and how NPCs will react to their character. Step 1 requires the player to choose their character's gender. This has no concrete effect on the character's attributes, but it will affect how some NPCs will interact with your character. Step 2 requires the player to choose their character's age category: young, adult, or old. The default setting is for an adult character, an age category with no positive or negative modifiers attached to it. Younger characters tend to be more physically fit, enjoying a 1-point bonus to their physique, agility, or senses attribute, but their lack of experience and education reduces their starting pool of skill points by 2. Inversely, older characters suffer a 1-point penalty to their physique, agility, or senses attribute, while instead gaining 2 extra skill points to represent their additional life experience. Beyond the statistical bonuses and penalties, the character's age range will also have some impact on how NPCs perceive and interact with them. The third step of character creation is probably the most important. This is where the player chooses their character archetype. This essentially represents the character's profession or occupation prior to the events of the game. A character's archetype will heavily influence both the game's story as well as the way that NPCs will interact with them, because each archetype comes with its own backstory and its own explanation for why the character is trying to hunt down the mysterious, dismal man. Now, I discussed the archetypes before. There are 8 in total, covering several of the classic character types often seen in stories that were either written by or inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. Mechanically, each archetype can master 3 specialty skills, but the latest update also revealed that many archetypes will now also come with a basic minimum attribute requirement, and at least 3 new variant backgrounds, which will further modify your starting character. First, there's the Academic, a former research scientist from Miskatonic University who was part of an ill-fated research expedition. The Academic can master the medicine, psychology, and science skills, and requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to the mind attribute. The default background for an academic is the scientist, which comes with no special modifiers, but the player also has 3 other options. The physician, which grants a +1 bonus to your medicine skill at the cost of a -1 penalty to your melee and ranged combat skills. The psychiatrist, which grants a +1 bonus to psychology at the cost of -1 to your supernatural defense. And the researcher, which allows you to complete science and medicine-based research projects more quickly, but at the cost of a -1 penalty to your physical defense. Then there's the aristocrat, the last heir of a noble family who recently came to visit their now empty family estate, following the recent death of their mother. The aristocrat specializes in the occult, science, and speechcraft skills, and is the only archetype with no minimum requirements. According to some of the older promo material, the aristocrat may also start with a special follower, the loyal servant. The default background for the aristocrat is the patrician, but there are 3 other options. The prodigal, which grants the player extra jewelry in their inventory at the cost of reduced sex appeal. The bankrupt royalty, which grants a +1 to the survival skill at the cost of lower starting funds. And the cursed bloodline, which grants a +1 bonus to the occult skill at the cost of a permanent +3% chance for critical failures. The criminal archetype is a former enforcer for the mob who, while collecting protection money for his former employer, stumbled upon a sinister and disturbing nightclub. The criminal specializes in the firearms, stealth, and subterfuge skills, and requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to the agility attribute. The default background for the criminal is the gangster, but there are 3 other to choose from. The thief, which grants a +1 bonus to the stealth skill at the cost of a -1 penalty to your melee attack skill. The con artist, which grants a +1 bonus to the speechcraft skill at the cost of a -1 penalty to your physical defense. And the hitman, who starts with a +1 bonus to the firearm skill, but also starts with +50 angst. Angst is essentially a special type of experience points gained through negative insanity-inducing encounters. It's used to unlock special angst perks, usually inspired by mental conditions or insanities, which can grant additional bonuses, but generally also coming with a potent negative effect as well. So, in essence, the hitman will get a head start towards unlocking their first angst perk, but will also be less mentally stable. Moving on, next we have the Explorer archetype, which was unlocked as a Kickstarter stretch goal during the original crowdfunding campaign. The Explorer is a professional adventurer who embarked on an expedition to the darkest continent, where an ill-fated encounter with an ancient tribe left a supernatural mark on them. The Explorer can master the athletics, firearms, and survival skills, and, like the criminal, requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to the agility attribute. Similar to the aristocrat, older promotional material implies that the explorer might also start with a special companion, the faithful hound. The explorer's default background is the adventurer, but there are 3 other options. The big game hunter, who inflicts higher damage against beast-like foes, but suffers a -1 penalty to their melee attack skill. The Pathfinder, who has a lower chance of random combat encounters on the world map, but also has less inventory space than normal. And the Mountaineer, who gains a +1 bonus to their athletic skill, but is 2% less likely to get critical successes. The 5th character archetype is the hard-boiled investigator, who stumbles upon an occult conspiracy while trying to find a missing child. The investigator can master the investigation, firearms, and psychology skills, and requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to their senses attribute. The investigator's default background is the detective, but there are 3 other options. The ex-cop, who enjoys a +1 bonus to the firearm skill, at a cost of -5 to their starting sanity. The bounty hunter, who enjoys a +1 bonus to stealth, but must choose materialistic as their belief system. And the occult detective, who gains a +1 bonus to the occult skill, and, like the hitman, starts with +50 angst. Then there's the occultist, the 6th archetype, who's a fledgling member of a secret society, on the cusp of completing the profane ritual that will make them a full-fledged member. The occultist can master the occult, investigation, and medicine skills, and requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to the will attribute. The occultist's default background is secret society, but they have 4 other options. The alchemist, who can research medicine much faster than normal, but can't use their medicine skill for conventional skill challenges. The demonologist, who starts the game with the Children of Pazuzu spell, but at the cost of a -5 penalty to their starting sanity. The depraved occultist, who has a higher sex appeal attribute, but suffers a penalty to their ability to research artifacts. And the mesmerist, who gains a +1 bonus to the psychology skill, but again at a cost of a -5 penalty to their starting sanity. The performer archetype has the most benign backstory, being a talented performer who was invited to Arkham by an eccentric admirer shortly before the end of the world. The performer can master the athletics, speechcraft, and stealth skills, and requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to their presence attribute. The performer's default background is actor, but there are 3 other options. The busker, who gains a +1 bonus to the subterfuge skill at the cost of less starting money. The juggler, who starts with +2 to the throwing ability, but at the cost of a 3% higher chance of critical failures. And the movie actor, who enjoys a higher sex appeal attribute, but is also more likely to succumb to addictions. And finally, we have the soldier, a former military man who is part of a government assault on a coastal town inhabited by things that weren't entirely human. The soldier can master the firearms, melee, and survival skills, and requires a minimum of 6 points assigned to their physique attribute. The soldier's default background is private, but as with most of the other classes, they have 3 other options. The Marine, who starts the game with the special Aimed Shot perk, but also starts with a -5 penalty to their starting sanity. The Military Intelligence, who starts with a +1 to their subterfuge skill, at the cost of a -1 penalty to their physical defense. And the Sniper, who enjoys a 3% chance for critical hits with rifles, but at the cost of a -1 penalty to their reaction speed. Once the player has selected their archetype and background, they move on to step 4 of the character creation process. This is where they select their character's belief system, determining how their character tries to cope with the mind-obliterating insanity of New Arkham. There are 6 belief systems to choose from, each encouraging different types of play styles. If you want to keep your character sane, that is. This is one of the more unique mechanics in the game, with each belief system defining how your character can recover sanity while playing the game. Materialistic characters, for example, recover sanity when acting in a greedy or self-indulgent manner. This is diametrically opposed to the humanistic belief system, which instead rewards the player for being kind and altruistic. Rational characters regain sanity when taking actions that reinforce their rational worldview, such as when researching or discussing things like science and medicine. This is diametrically opposed to the esoteric belief system, which instead involves embracing the insanity of New Arkham, rewarding the player for further entrenching themselves in the occult. Divine characters are rewarded for placing their faith in God, either through dialogue or other acts of divine worship. This is diametrically opposed by the nihilistic belief system, or the belief that humanity just doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. In fact, nothing matters. Nothing. The nihilistic belief system is unique in that it can never be used to recover sanity, instead granting the player a higher mental resistance, to represent their jaded outlook and general lack of concern for anything that happens around them. Once the player has selected a belief system, they move on to step 5, where they choose the profile picture to represent the character they'll be playing. This image is not locked by archetype, background, or even gender, so the player has free rein to select whatever profile picture they want to use. At least some of the profile pictures are apparently based on the higher tier backers from the original crowdfunding campaign. This is also when the player chooses their character's name. Then the player moves on to step 6, where they're finally allowed to assign their attribute and skill points. There are a total of 6 attributes and 12 skills to choose from. It appears that characters start with a default score of 4 in each attribute, though if the character chose an archetype with a minimum attribute requirement, then that attribute will start at 6 instead, and the player begins with a pool of 7 attribute points to distribute as they see fit. But really, given that the player also appears to be able to reduce their base attributes below 4, they basically have a total of 33 attribute points to play with. Attributes determine a character's base abilities, influencing the effectiveness of linked skills as well as the majority of the character's secondary attributes, such as health, action points, and reaction. They'll also likely be used for certain environment or character interactions. They can theoretically be raised during the campaign, but we don't really have any details on that just yet. Skills all start at a default score of 0, again influenced by the player's previous decisions during character creation. The player has 5 skill points to distribute amongst their 12 skills, but they can't assign more than 2 skill points per skill during character creation. Though a character can start with a skill as high as rank 3, if they pick a background that grants a bonus to that skill. Skills will heavily influence how the player approaches the game, especially given how few skill points the player actually starts with. I don't believe it's been confirmed how high the player can advance a skill, but it is confirmed that skills will have a soft cap that can only be exceeded if the player is using an archetype which specializes in that particular skill. Skills will also be the main determining factor for which skill perks the player can learn. Every skill has at least 3 linked skill perks that can be learned as the player gains experience points, and the player will theoretically be able to improve their skills over time. Again, we don't really know much about how that's going to work, but we'll likely get a better idea of the specifics once the demo comes out later this year. And that brings the player to Step 7, the final step of character creation, where they can review their character sheet and see the results of their decisions. The player can backtrack to any previous step to revise their decisions if they wish, or confirm their decisions and finish the character creation process. Congratulations! Your character is now ready for New Arkham. Have fun watching them die! Or go insane. Or both. Overall, it sounds like a fairly straightforward but reasonably in-depth character creation system, and one that stresses reactivity based on the player's decisions. I like how they stress that things like age, archetype, belief systems, gender, and your attributes will directly affect how you interact with the world and how NPCs will perceive you. According to the latest update from Cultic Games, the upcoming demo will include the full character creation system, and will allow the player to make a wide variety of different character builds for the gameplay segment. Hopefully that will give us the opportunity to test out all that reactivity for ourselves. And personally, I can't wait. But until then, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Stygian, Reign of the Old Ones, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, their official YouTube channel, or the campaign page over on Kickstarter. Links are in the description.